I still remember that evening as if it happened just a heartbeat ago. The air was heavy with the smell of vanilla and old memories. My living room, usually quiet and cold, felt strangely alive, filled with laughter, flickering candlelight, and the faint sound of a birthday song that didn't feel like it was meant for me. It was my birthday, my 57th. I stood there, frozen, as my son, Daniel, held out a neatly wrapped box with a smirk tugging at his lips. "Here, Mom," he said, his voice casual, almost impatient. "Something to cover up your old face." Everyone laughed, his wife, his friends, even my sister who dropped by for the celebration. I forced a smile. The kind mothers are trained to wear when their hearts are breaking, but their pride won't let them show it. I took the gift from him, my hands trembling slightly. The paper was smooth and expensive, gold with a red ribbon, the kind of wrapping I used to save for his school projects when money was tight. I pulled at the ribbon gently, the way I once untangled the knots in his shoelaces when he was 5. Inside was a beautiful silk scarf, soft, delicate, and far too elegant for someone like me. "It's lovely," I whispered. My voice cracked a little, and I hoped no one noticed. Daniel grinned, sipping from his wine glass. "I figured it's time you wore something classy. You've still got potential." The table erupted in polite laughter again, but to me, his words echoed differently, sharp, mocking, cold. I nodded, draping the scarf around my neck. The silk touched my skin, and I felt a sudden chill, though the room was warm. I caught my reflection in the glass cabinet, an aging woman with tired eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach her heart. The scarf looked out of place on me, like a beautiful lie covering years of truth. My sister, Ruth, leaned over and whispered, "He didn't mean it that way, you know." I nodded again. "I know," I said, "but I didn't, or maybe I did, and that's what hurt most." The cake came out next, carried by Daniel's wife, Claire, a graceful woman with perfect hair and the kind of calm that comes from never having to worry about bills or hunger or heartbreak. The cake was layered with cream and strawberries, decorated beautifully, but when I saw it, my chest tightened. It was the same kind of cake I used to make for Daniel when he was little. Same white frosting, same red fruit. I had taught myself to bake it from scratch because we couldn't afford store-bought ones back then. I blinked hard, trying to hide the tears that threatened to spill. The candles flickered, their light dancing across Daniel's face, so grown up now, so far from the little boy who used to hug me and say, "Mommy, you're my best friend." He leaned over to light the candles, then looked at me. "Come on, Mom," he said softly, "make a wish." I did, but not out loud. I wished to go back, just once, to the time when he still needed me. When my wrinkles didn't bother him, when my hands were the ones he held tight crossing the street. Everyone started singing happy birthday, their voices bright, cheerful, almost mocking in the way happiness feels when your heart isn't part of it. I smiled again, tears stinging my eyes, and blew out the candles. The room erupted in applause. Daniel's friends clapped, Claire kissed my cheek, and someone handed me a knife to cut the cake. My hand trembled as I sliced through the soft layers. The sweet smell filled the room, sugar and nostalgia. "Speech, Mom," one of his friends called out. I froze, my heart pounded. I wasn't prepared for this. I had spent all day rehearsing polite smiles, not words. "Oh, I don't know what to say," I laughed nervously. "I'm just happy to have you all here." Daniel raised his glass. "To Mom, the strongest woman I know and the most stubborn." Laughter again, always laughter. I wanted to be proud. I wanted to feel joy. But all I felt was distance, like I was watching them from behind glass, invisible. When the laughter died down, I quietly excused myself and went to the kitchen. My feet moved slowly, the way they do when you're trying not to break down in front of people. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon detergent and warm sugar. I leaned against the counter, breathing hard. From the other room, I could still hear them laughing, the clinking of glasses, Daniel's voice, so confident, so full of life. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I saw him as a little boy again, sitting on the kitchen counter while I baked. "Don't eat that yet," I'd scold. "You'll ruin your appetite." He'd giggle, stealing a strawberry anyway. "Mom, it's just one piece." "Just one," I'd say, pretending to be stern. I smiled at the memory, then opened my eyes back to the present, where he barely looked at me for more than a few seconds. Claire appeared at the doorway, her voice gentle. "Are you okay, Mrs. Bennet?" I turned quickly, wiping my eyes. "Yes, yes, dear, just tired." She smiled kindly. "It's a lovely scarf. He spent quite a bit on it." "Did he?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "He wanted something that would make you feel special." I forced a smile. He's always been thoughtful. But I could feel the lie burn in my throat. Thoughtful? Maybe once. Now, it felt like he lived in a world where I was just a faded photograph. After a few minutes, I went back to the living room. The party was winding down, the laughter quieter now. Ruth was gathering plates, and Daniel was on his phone, scrolling through something. "Mom," he said, not looking up, "Claire and I were thinking of taking a trip next month. Maybe Europe. You'll be fine here, right?" I nodded slowly. "Of course, sweetheart, I'll manage." He finally looked at me, smiling faintly. "You always do." There was a pause, brief but heavy. I wanted to tell him everything I'd ever held back. How I used to cry at night when he stopped calling. How I replayed his childhood videos when the house got too quiet. How I missed him, desperately. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. Instead, I said the only thing mothers know how to say. "I'm proud of you, Daniel." He smiled, distracted. "Thanks, Mom." Later, when everyone had left, the house fell into silence again. The leftover cake sat on the table, candles melted into tiny wax pools. I picked up the scarf from the couch and held it against my chest. The silk was soft, but it felt cold, like the distance between me and the boy I once knew. I sat by the window, the streetlight casting a dull orange glow through the curtains. Outside, the city was alive, cars rushing, people laughing, lives moving on. Inside, time felt still. I thought about my husband, Daniel's father, and how he used to surprise me with small gifts on birthdays. A rose, a note, a cheap necklace that turned my skin green but made me feel loved. He'd left years ago. The last thing he said to me was, "You'll be fine without me." And I was, but fine doesn't mean happy. I looked at the scarf again. It really was beautiful, deep blue with faint silver threads. For a moment, I imagined Daniel choosing it carefully, running his fingers along the fabric, thinking of me. Maybe he did. Maybe that joke wasn't meant to hurt. But pain has a memory, and mine remembered too much. I stood up, walked to the mirror, and wrapped the scarf properly around my neck. It did make me look different, softer, older, yes, but perhaps not invisible. I whispered to my reflection, "Happy birthday, Mary." My voice sounded strange, foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Then quietly, I began cleaning the dishes, because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. Keep busy, keep quiet, keep everything together. When I was done, I turned off the lights, the scarf still around my shoulders, and stood by the cake one last time. The frosting glistened in the faint light. I cut a small slice and tasted it. Sweet, just like the ones I used to make. And for the first time that night, I let myself cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just soft tears that fell silently, one after another, like rain on a forgotten window. Because sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from hate or cruelty. It comes from being forgotten by the people you love the most. And as I stood there in the dark, scarf around my neck and heart heavy in my chest, I whispered to no one, "I wish he'd just remember me the way I remember him." The candles had long melted, but their scent still lingered, warm, sweet, and sad. The night grew quiet again, and I could almost hear his voice as a child, laughing, calling me mommy, asking for another slice of cake. But it was only the wind outside. And I was alone. When I was young, I used to believe love could fix anything. I didn't have much back then, just a worn-out suitcase, a head full of dreams, and a heart that believed in forever. I was 21 when I met David. He was tall, with messy hair and a smile that could light up every dark corner inside me. He wasn't rich or powerful. He was a construction worker, tired and honest, with hands rough from labor and eyes that promised something I had never known before: safety. We met at a small diner where I worked as a waitress. He used to sit by the window every evening after work, ordering the same thing, black coffee and an apple pie. He always left a bigger tip than he could probably afford. One night, as I cleaned his table, he looked up and said, "You always smile, even when you're exhausted. How do you do that?" I laughed shyly. I guess if I stopped smiling, I might not make it through the day. He grinned, "Then I'll make it my job to keep you smiling." It was such a simple line, but my heart believed it. We got married a year later in a tiny church with peeling paint and plastic flowers. My mother cried tears of joy. His family couldn't make it. We didn't have much, just love and a promise to build something out of nothing. And for a while we did. We rented a small apartment with leaky pipes and thin walls. Every morning, David left early for work, and I'd kiss his cheek as he walked out the door. "Be careful," I'd always say. He'd wink and reply, "Always am." When I found out I was pregnant, we both cried, the kind of tears that come from fear and happiness colliding. David lifted me off the ground and spun me around, whispering, "We're going to be a family, Mary. A real one." Those months were hard but beautiful. We counted every coin, saved every scrap, and dreamed of a better future. When Daniel was born, I thought my heart might explode. He was tiny and loud, with his father's eyes and my nose. I remember holding him for the first time, feeling his heartbeat against my chest, and whispering, "I'll protect you from everything." But life, as I learned later, doesn't make promises it keeps. David started taking extra shifts. "For the baby," he'd say. I stayed home, my world reduced to feeding schedules and diaper changes. Some nights when the baby cried for hours, I'd sing to him softly, old lullabies my mother used to hum. And when he finally slept, I'd sit by his crib, staring at his tiny hands, wondering how something so small could carry so much of my soul. Money was always short. There were days when we ate plain rice and tea for dinner, pretending we weren't hungry. I'd tell David, "I'm fine, I ate earlier," but he knew I was lying. He'd sigh, breaking his portion in half and sliding it onto my plate. We didn't have luxuries, just moments. His laughter, Daniel's giggles, the sound of rain against our window while we dreamed of a house with a backyard. But somewhere along the way, the weight of survival began to change things. David became quieter, his smiles rarer. I'd wake up to find him staring out the window, cigarette in hand. When I asked what was wrong, he'd just say, "I'm tired, Mary, that's all." Then came the day he told me he had an offer to work abroad, a year-long contract that paid more than he'd ever earned. "It's only for a while," he said, holding my hands. "We'll finally be able to buy that house. Daniel will go to a good school, you won't have to struggle anymore." I wanted to be happy for him, but my heart ached. I tried to smile. "You'll write." He nodded every week. And for a while, he did. His letters came regularly, short, affectionate, full of promises. But as the months passed, they became fewer. The words grew colder. Sometimes weeks went by without a single message. I told myself he was busy, that he still loved us, that love could survive distance. But love needs presence. And slowly, he began to fade like an echo I could no longer reach. Raising Daniel alone wasn't easy. I worked part-time cleaning offices, taking sewing jobs on the side. My hands were always sore, my back aching, but every night when Daniel fell asleep, I'd watch him and whisper, "It's all worth it, baby. One day you'll have everything I never did." He was my world. I remember his first day of school. He wore a faded uniform I'd bought from a thrift shop. I had washed and ironed it 3 times to make it look new. He was nervous, clutching my hand so tight that my fingers went numb. "Don't let go, Mom," he whispered. "I'll never let go," I promised. That day, as he disappeared into the classroom, I stood by the gate for almost an hour, just to make sure he was okay. Years passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. Every birthday, I baked him a cake, sometimes small, sometimes lopsided, but always made with love. He'd blow out the candles, his little face glowing in the light, and shout, "You're the best, Mom." Those moments made every sacrifice worth it. But children grow up, and the world starts to whisper things to them that mothers can't control. By the time he was a teenager, Daniel had begun to change. He started noticing things, the worn-out furniture, my simple clothes, the fact that other kids, parents drove cars while I took the bus. One afternoon, he came home angry. "Why don't we ever have money, Mom?" he shouted. "Why can't we be like other families?" I froze. "We're doing our best, sweetheart." He slammed the door to his room. I stood there, trembling, my heart breaking quietly. That night, I wrote to David again, asking for help. The letter came back unopened with a note, address no longer valid. That's when I knew. He wasn't coming back. I sat on the floor that night, holding Daniel's baby blanket, crying silently. I didn't tell Daniel. I couldn't. I couldn't bear to shatter his image of his father, so I lied. I told him his dad was still working, saving money for us. He nodded, his anger softening. I kept that lie for years. Every time he asked, I'd say, "Soon, sweetheart. He'll come home soon." But the truth was, the man I married had already built another life somewhere else. Still, I worked harder. I took double shifts, sewed late into the night, sold jewelry piece by piece. I skipped meals so Daniel could have new shoes. When he needed money for school trips, I said yes, even when my pockets were empty. Sometimes I'd see my reflection in the mirror, hollow eyes, cracked hands, and barely recognize myself. But then Daniel would smile, and I'd find strength again. I remember one winter evening when the heater broke. The apartment was freezing, and Daniel was coughing. I wrapped him in every blanket we had, holding him close. "It's just a little cold," I said softly. "We'll be warm soon." He looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Mom, you're shaking." I smiled, though my lips were numb. "I'm fine, baby, go to sleep." When he drifted off, I quietly cried into his hair, praying for a better tomorrow. Sometimes I think motherhood is just a long chain of quiet sacrifices that no one ever sees. I remember his graduation day. He stood tall in his cap and gown, looking proud and distant at the same time. When his name was called, I clapped until my hands hurt. He found me in the crowd and smiled, just a small one, but it felt like sunlight. Afterward, I handed him a small envelope. Inside was money I'd saved for months. "It's not much," I said, "but it'll help with your college fees." He frowned. "Mom, where did you get this?" "Don't worry about it," I said quickly. "Just promise me you'll study hard." He hugged me briefly, and for a moment, I felt the little boy I used to know. That night, when he went to sleep, I opened the drawer where I kept my old wedding ring. I looked at it for a long time before selling it the next morning. It was the last thing I had from David. I told myself love means letting go, even if it leaves you empty. As I watched Daniel board the bus to college a few weeks later, he barely turned back. I waved until he disappeared, tears blurring my vision. When I got home, the apartment felt too quiet, too clean. His laughter was gone, his shoes no longer by the door. I sat on the edge of his bed, breathing in the scent of his pillow, and whispered, "I'm proud of you." No one heard, but I said it anyway. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. My hands ached, my body tired. Yet my heart, oh, my heart still held on to one thing, the hope that someday he'd understand everything I did. All the sleepless nights, the hunger, the heartbreak, every piece of me that I gave away for him. Because that's what mothers do. We give until there's nothing left, and then we find a way to give more. There's a silence that creeps into a home long before anyone notices it. It doesn't arrive with slammed doors or shouted words. It starts softly, like a shift in the air, a missing good morning, a shorter phone call, a colder hug. That's how it began with Daniel. He came home from college less and less. When he did, he seemed different, sharper somehow. His eyes darted over the old furniture like they didn't belong to him anymore. He no longer talked about his classes or his dreams. Instead, he spoke about connections, networking, and image. "Mom," he said once, shaking his head as he looked at my hands, rough from years of work, "you really should start taking better care of yourself. You look tired all the time." I smiled faintly. "I am tired, sweetheart." He didn't laugh. He just frowned, like my exhaustion embarrassed him. He started buying expensive clothes and designer shoes, even though he was still a student. I didn't ask where the money came from. I was just happy he didn't need mine anymore. But every time he visited, something felt heavier between us. One Sunday afternoon, I cooked his favorite meal, roasted chicken with garlic and lemon, just like when he was a boy. I even bought the nice plates we never used, the ones I saved for special occasions. When he arrived, I greeted him at the door with a smile, my heart fluttering like it used to. "Welcome home," I said softly. He hugged me briefly, barely a second, then walked in, glancing around. "Wow," he said, wrinkling his nose. "This place hasn't changed in years." I laughed nervously. "I guess I'm used to it, it's home." "Yeah, but don't you ever want more?" He gestured toward the peeling wallpaper. "You could repaint, get new furniture or something. It's depressing." Depressing. That word sank deep into me. I tried not to let it show, busying myself with the food. "I'll think about it," I said softly. During dinner, he barely touched the meal. His phone kept buzzing. He smiled at it more than he smiled at me. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, just someone I'm seeing." I smiled. "That's wonderful. What's her name?" He shrugged. "Claire." "Pretty name." He nodded, but didn't elaborate. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't want to seem intrusive. So I just listened to the silence, filling the room like smoke. When he finally left, he hugged me quickly at the door and said, "Take care, Mom." I stood there long after he was gone, staring at the empty chair where he used to sit. His plate was still full. The chicken had gone cold. That night, I ate alone. Months passed, calls became rare, texts even rarer. When I did hear from him, it was usually short. "Busy week, Mom, we'll call soon." "Sorry, can't visit this month." "Work's crazy, take care." Every message felt like a small goodbye. Sometimes I'd scroll through old photos, his graduation, his first day of school, his 5th birthday when he wore a paper crown and called himself King Daniel. I'd trace my fingers over the pictures, trying to remember the sound of his laugh. I missed my son, not the man he was becoming, but the boy he once was. One day, I decided to visit him. He'd moved to a new apartment in the city. I baked cookies, his favorite chocolate ones, and took the early train. When I arrived, I knocked eagerly. He opened the door, looking startled. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you," I said with a smile. "I brought cookies." He sighed, glancing behind him. It's not really a good time." "Why, are you busy?" "Yeah, actually, I've got friends over." "Oh, I won't stay long, just a few minutes." Before he could stop me, I stepped inside. The apartment was beautiful, modern, bright, expensive. Everything gleamed. But what caught my attention wasn't the furniture. It was the people. 2 men and a woman sat in the living room, sipping wine and laughing. They all looked polished, well-dressed, educated, the kind of people who never had to skip meals or count coins. Daniel cleared his throat. "Everyone, this is my mom." Their smiles were polite, almost pitying. "Nice to meet you," one of them said. I smiled back awkwardly, holding the tin of cookies. "Hello, I didn't mean to interrupt." Daniel stepped forward, taking the cookies from me quickly. "Thanks, Mom. I'll call you later, okay?" I nodded, my cheeks burning. "Of course, I'll go." I walked out slowly, the sound of their laughter echoing behind me like a cruel goodbye. On the train ride home, I held the empty cookie tin on my lap. The city lights blurred through the window, and I tried not to cry. That night, I placed the tin back in the cupboard. It still smelled faintly of chocolate and shame. The next time I saw him was a year later, at his engagement party. He called out of the blue, his voice cheerful. "Mom, I've got news. Claire and I are getting married." I was silent for a second. "Married? Oh, Daniel, that's wonderful." He hesitated. "There's a dinner this weekend. I want you to come." My heart leapt. Of course, I'll be there. I spent 2 days sewing a new dress, navy blue, with lace at the sleeves. My hands shook as I worked, the needle pricking my fingers more than once. But I didn't care. I wanted to look presentable, maybe even beautiful, for my son's big day. When I arrived at the restaurant, I almost turned around. It was the fanciest place I'd ever seen: chandeliers, violins, waiters in black suits. I felt small just walking in. Claire greeted me politely. She was stunning, poised, elegant, everything I was. "It's lovely to finally meet you," she said with a gentle smile. "You too, dear," I replied, trying not to fumble with my purse. Daniel introduced me to everyone, but his voice lacked warmth. It felt rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. At dinner, I sat quietly, listening to the conversation about careers, travel, investments, worlds I didn't belong to. When someone asked me what I did, I smiled and said, "I used to clean houses. I'm retired now." There was an awkward silence, then someone changed the subject. Daniel avoided my eyes. Later that evening, when everyone was taking pictures, I asked, "Can we get one together?" He hesitated. Maybe later, Mom. We're kind of busy right now." I nodded, pretending it didn't hurt. But when I caught my reflection in a mirror, The cheap dress, the wrinkles, the tired eyes, I finally understood. He was ashamed of me. And that realization felt like a knife, twisting slowly in my chest. After the engagement, months passed without a single call. I learned about their wedding through a mutual friend, small, elegant, perfect. I wasn't invited. When I asked him later why, his text was short. "It was private, Mom. You understand, right?" I didn't reply. I cried that night until my throat ached. For weeks, I lived in silence. The house felt emptier than ever. I spent my days cleaning the same corners, cooking meals I couldn't finish, waiting for a phone that never rang. I thought about all the nights I stayed awake nursing him through fevers, the mornings I skipped breakfast so he could eat, the years I worked until my body gave up. And for what? A scarf, a few polite smiles, and the echo of a word that still stung, depressing. One evening, I was cleaning the attic when I found an old box, Daniel's childhood things. Drawings, toys, letters. I sat there for hours, surrounded by the ghosts of laughter. One crayon drawing caught my eye. It was a stick figure version of me holding his hand. Above it, in crooked handwriting, he'd written, "Me and Mommy forever." I pressed it against my chest and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. That night, I whispered to the empty house, "What happened to us, Daniel? When did love turn into embarrassment?" The walls didn't answer. They never do. A few months later, I got a call. "Mom," it was his voice, hesitant, quiet. "Daniel," my heart skipped. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I just wanted to tell you, Claire's pregnant." Tears filled my eyes instantly. "Oh my God, a baby, I'm going to be a grandmother." "Yeah," he said, but his tone was distant. "We're excited, just wanted you to know." "Can I visit, maybe help out when?" He cut me off. "Let's see later, okay? We've got a lot going on." "Oh, of course, I understand." After we hung up, I sat there staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. As the months went by, I imagined what my grandchild might look like, if they'd have Daniel's eyes or my smile. I started knitting tiny sweaters and socks, stacking them neatly in a drawer. But he never called again. When I finally met the baby, it wasn't at their home. It was at a family gathering months later by accident. The baby was beautiful, asleep in Claire's arms. Daniel barely introduced me. "Don't wake him," he whispered as I leaned closer. "I just want to see," I said softly. He sighed, "Mom, please, you'll make him cry." I stepped back quietly. My heart felt heavy and hollow at the same time. I smiled anyway. "He's perfect," I whispered. Daniel nodded, distracted by his phone. And that was the moment, the exact moment, I realized my place in his life. Not a mother, not a friend, just an obligation. And yet, I couldn't stop loving him, even if it broke me 1,000 times over. I used to think a mother's love could survive anything, but I was wrong. Love, when left alone too long, becomes a quiet ache, one that never heals, only settles deeper. After Daniel's wedding, my life began to shrink into small routines. The kettle's whistle in the morning, the creak of the old floorboards, the soft hum of the radio that filled the silence when no one else did. I woke early every day even though I had nowhere to be. The house was too big for one person, too empty for laughter. Sometimes, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea, staring at the street outside, watching strangers live their lives while mine stood still. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter. My body was weaker now, my hands shook when I tried to write checks. After losing my last part-time cleaning job, I began selling small things, the old clock David had given me, my wedding dress, even the porcelain figurines I'd collected over the years. I told myself they were just objects, but each one carried a piece of memory, a piece of me. One afternoon, I found a letter from the landlord slipped under the door. Rent increase. My heart sank. I stared at the paper for a long time before picking up the phone. "Daniel," I said softly when he answered. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" His voice was distracted, the sound of typing in the background. I just wanted to ask if you could help me out a little this month, just until I find another job." He sighed. "Mom, things are tight right now. Claire's on maternity leave and we've got a lot of expenses." "Oh, of course," I said quickly. "I understand." There was silence. "Are you okay, though?" he asked finally. Yes, I lied. "I'll manage." All right, I'll call you soon, okay. But he didn't. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter still in my hand, the house dark except for the weak glow of a single lamp. I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. Not because of poverty, I'd known that before, but because of loneliness. There's a kind of loneliness that's worse than being alone. It's being forgotten by the one person you gave your life to. A few weeks later, I saw him again. He came by with Claire and the baby, my grandson. My heart lifted when I saw them at the door. "Daniel," I cried, nearly dropping the dish I was holding. "Come in, come in." He smiled politely, stepping inside. Claire followed, elegant as always, holding the baby close. "Say hi to Grandma," Daniel said lightly, but his son just blinked at me, sucking on his thumb. I laughed softly. "He's beautiful," I whispered, reaching out carefully. "May I?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. I took the baby gently into my arms, my hands trembling. He smelled of milk and warmth, and I felt something inside me melt. "You have your father's eyes," I whispered to him, "and maybe a bit of mine too." "Don't spoil him," Daniel said with a small laugh. "He's already the boss of the house." I smiled, pretending to joke, like his father was. We sat for a while, talking about nothing, the weather, the baby, his work. But beneath it all, I could feel the distance. Every question I asked was met with half answers. Every glance he gave me felt rehearsed. When they left, I hugged him tightly. He patted my shoulder, quick, polite. Claire gave me a faint smile. "Take care, Mom," Daniel said as he walked out. And then they were gone. I stood by the door long after the sound of their car faded, the baby's warmth still lingering on my arms. That winter was harsh. The wind slipped through the cracks in the windows, and the heater broke again. I wore layers of sweaters and boiled water on the stove just to keep the kitchen warm. One night, I fainted while cleaning. When I woke up, I was on the floor, my head throbbing. I don't know how long I'd been there. The phone lay a few feet away. I tried calling Daniel, but it went to voicemail. So I called Ruth instead. She arrived an hour later, frantic. "Mary, my God, what happened?" I tried to laugh. I think I just stood up too fast. She helped me onto the couch, her eyes wet. "You can't keep living like this. You need help." "I'm fine," I said stubbornly. "I just need to rest." Ruth sighed. "You should tell Daniel." "No," I said quickly. "He's busy. He doesn't need to worry." She looked at me sadly. "He's your son." I smiled weakly. "Yes, but he's also someone else's husband now, someone else's priority." She said nothing, and in that silence, I realized how far I'd fallen, not just in health or wealth, but in relevance. Spring came, but it didn't feel like renewal. It felt like waiting for something that wasn't coming back. One afternoon, I saw a letter addressed to me, official-looking, with red ink on the corner. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding. It was a final notice. I was behind on payments. That night, I packed a few belongings, some clothes, photos, the box of Daniel's childhood things. I sat on the floor, holding his baby drawing again, me and Mommy forever. I whispered, "Forever's not what I thought it would be." Tears slid down my cheeks. I didn't even bother wiping them. A week later, I swallowed my pride and went to Daniel's office. The receptionist looked at me curiously as I stood there, clutching my worn purse. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "I'm his mother," I said softly, "just for a few minutes." She smiled politely. One moment. When Daniel saw me, his expression froze. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I tried calling, but..." He glanced around nervously. "You shouldn't have come here. People..." He stopped himself. "What's wrong?" I took a shaky breath. "I'm behind on rent, Daniel. I might lose the apartment." He looked uncomfortable. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I didn't want to bother you." He rubbed his forehead. "Look, Mom, things are complicated right now. Claire and I are planning to move. Money's tight." I nodded slowly, my heart sinking. "I understand." He hesitated, then pulled out his wallet. "Here," he said, handing me some cash. "It's not much, but it should help for now." I took it quietly, my fingers trembling. "Thank you, sweetheart." He sighed. "Mom, you've got to start thinking about downsizing. Maybe move in with Aunt Ruth or a smaller place." I forced a smile. "Of course." As I turned to leave, he called out, "Mom." I looked back. "Don't come to the office again, okay? Just call me." I nodded. "All right, Daniel." I walked out of that building feeling smaller than I'd ever felt before. Not because of the money, but because of the shame, the realization that I was no longer welcome in his world. That night, I sat by the window, holding the money he'd given me. My hands shook so much I dropped it once. It fluttered to the floor like something meaningless. For the first time, I wondered what my life would have been if I hadn't given up everything. The job I wanted, the education I never finished, the dreams I buried so he could live his. But mothers aren't allowed to regret. We just ate quietly, waiting for the world to remember us. I decided to sell the apartment and move somewhere smaller. I packed up what little I had left. Every item told a story: the coffee mug Daniel made in school, the blanket he used as a baby, the faded photograph of me and David when we still believed in forever. I placed the scarf Daniel gave me, that beautiful, cruel reminder, on top of the box. When the movers came, I stood in the empty room one last time. The walls seemed to whisper back every sound that had ever lived there: laughter, crying, lullabies. I ran my hand along the wall and whispered, "Thank you for keeping us." Then I left. The new place was smaller, quieter, lonelier. The windows faced a busy street, but the noise felt distant. I started cleaning houses again, part-time, just enough to get by. My knees hurt, my back screamed, but it gave me a reason to wake up. Sometimes I'd see young mothers with their children, laughing in parks. I'd smile at them, though they didn't notice me. Once a little boy ran past, holding his mother's hand. He looked back at me and smiled, that same wide, innocent smile Daniel used to have. I smiled back, tears blurring my vision. That night, I opened my old box again. I looked at Daniel's drawings, the photo of his first school day, the one where he'd written, "I love you, Mom." I whispered into the empty room, "I love you too, my son, always." And though no one could hear it, I swear the air around me softened, as if love, even unreturned, still left traces in the world. Years have a way of slipping by when no one's watching. One day you wake up and realize the world has moved on, and you've stayed behind. That's what happened to me. The days began to blend together. Morning tea, the same old radio songs, the smell of dust in the corners I kept cleaning even though no one came to visit. My hands had grown slower, my eyes weaker. The mirror had become a stranger, one I avoided looking at for too long. I lived alone, but not by choice. Loneliness had become my silent roommate. It followed me everywhere: when I cooked, when I ate, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for the phone that never rang. Sometimes I'd pick up the receiver just to make sure it still worked. Then I'd put it back down and laugh at myself. "You're losing it, Mary," I'd whisper. "Completely losing it." It had been months since I last heard from Daniel. He was busy, that's what I told myself every time the silence stretched too long. Busy with work, busy with family, busy with life. But deep down, I knew I wasn't part of his world anymore. One afternoon, I ran into my neighbor, Mrs. Green, outside the grocery store. She was a kind woman, always chatty, always curious. "Haven't seen your son around lately," she said with a smile that wasn't entirely innocent. "He's doing well," I replied quickly. "Very busy, you know how it is." "Oh, of course," she said. "My daughter barely calls me too. Kids these days so caught up in their own lives." She sighed dramatically. "At least you must be proud. He's successful, right? I saw his name in a magazine once." I forced a smile. "Yes, very proud." She touched my arm gently. "You did a good job, Mary. Raising him alone, after all you went through, that takes strength." Strength, funny how people call it that, when what they really mean is endurance. After we said goodbye, I walked home slowly, the groceries heavy in my hands. The streets were lined with trees shedding their leaves like old memories, falling one by one. When I got home, I opened the window and watched the wind scatter them away. I thought about Daniel as a boy, how he used to chase after fallen leaves, laughing, trying to catch them midair. I could still hear that laughter, sometimes faint, like an echo from another lifetime. I kept myself busy because stillness was dangerous. Stillness made room for thoughts. I volunteered at the local library twice a week, stacking books and helping children find stories. I liked the smell of paper. It reminded me of old dreams. One little girl, Emily, used to follow me around. She had curly hair and the brightest eyes. "Miss Mary," she'd say, tugging on my sleeve, "read me the one about the mother and the stars." And I would, every time. When I read to her, I forgot my aching joints, my empty house, my quiet phone. She reminded me of Daniel when he was small, curious, full of wonder. One afternoon, she looked up at me and asked, "Do you have any children?" I smiled softly, "Yes, a son." She grinned, "Where is he?" "He's grown up now, has a family of his own." She thought for a moment, "Does he still tell you stories?" I swallowed hard, "No, sweetheart, not anymore." She frowned, "That's sad." "Yes," I whispered, "it is." That night, I sat by the window and watched the stars, the same ones I used to point out to Daniel when he was a child. We had a game. We'd each pick one star and name it. His was always the brightest. I whispered to the night, "Do you still remember me, my love? Do you still look up sometimes?" The stars, like the years, stayed silent. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was from Daniel. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It was short, just a few lines in his neat handwriting. "Hi, Mom. I hope you're doing okay. I know it's been a while. Claire and I have been busy with work and the baby, he's growing so fast. We're planning a small birthday dinner for me next month. You should come. It's been too long. Love, Daniel." My eyes filled with tears. He remembered. He wanted me there. I spent the next few weeks preparing. I used what little money I had saved to buy a modest dress, soft gray, with a lace collar. I even went to the salon for the first time in years. The hairdresser smiled kindly as she brushed through my thinning hair. "Got a special occasion?" she asked. "Yes," I said softly, "my son's birthday." She smiled. "He's lucky to have you." I smiled back, though I wasn't sure he'd agree. The night of the dinner, I arrived early. Their house was big and beautiful, warm lights glowing through tall windows. I stood at the door for a moment, my heart pounding, then rang the bell. Claire opened it. She looked surprised but smiled. "Mrs. Bennet, you made it." "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wouldn't miss it." Inside, everything looked perfect: crystal glasses, silver cutlery, laughter floating in the air. Daniel stood near the dining table, talking to a group of friends. When he saw me, his smile faltered slightly, just for a second before he walked over. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek, "I'm glad you came." I smiled up at him. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." He looked handsome in his suit, confident, successful. But when he turned back to his friends, I noticed how easily I disappeared from his world, like a ghost lingering in the corner of a photograph. I sat quietly while everyone talked. I laughed when they laughed, nodded when they spoke, though most of what they said felt foreign to me. Investments, vacations, business trips. When the food was served, I noticed Daniel's son, my grandson, staring at me curiously from across the table. I smiled at him, but he looked away. I wanted to speak, to tell him stories, to hold him, but I didn't know if I was allowed to anymore. At one point, one of Daniel's friends asked casually, "So, Mrs. Bennet, what do you do these days?" "Oh, nothing exciting," I said lightly. "Just some volunteer work at the library." He smiled politely. "That's nice." Daniel quickly changed the subject. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of voices and clinking glasses. I watched my son laugh, the same boy who once hugged me for baking him a crooked cake, now laughing at jokes I didn't understand. When dessert came, I saw the cake, layered with cream and strawberries. My breath caught. It looked just like the ones I used to make for him. I stared at it for a long time, memories flooding back. He noticed my expression and smiled faintly. "You used to make that for me every year, remember?" I nodded, my voice trembling. "Yes, you always asked for extra strawberries." He chuckled softly. "I guess some things never change." For the first time that night, he looked at me, really looked. And in that moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe love, maybe both. Claire leaned in and whispered something to him. He nodded, then stood up. "Everyone, I just want to say a quick thank you for coming tonight." He glanced at me, his voice softer. "And to my mom, for everything she's done for me. I don't say it enough, but I wouldn't be here without her." My heart stopped. Applause filled the room, but all I heard was that single sentence, fragile, imperfect, but real. I smiled through my tears. After dinner, as people began to leave, Daniel walked me to the door. "I'm sorry if tonight was overwhelming," he said quietly. "It was wonderful," I said. "You've built a beautiful life, Daniel." He smiled, looking down. "I couldn't have done it without you." I touched his cheek gently, my hand trembling. "You did more than I ever dreamed, my boy." For a moment, just a brief one, he hugged me, really hugged me, the way he used to. I felt the warmth of his chest against mine, the faint smell of his cologne mixed with the ghost of baby powder that still lived in my memories. Then he pulled away. "I'll call you soon, okay?" I nodded, though we both knew what that meant. When I stepped outside, the cold air bit my skin. I pulled the scarf tighter around my neck, the same one he'd given me that first birthday. I looked back at the glowing windows and whispered, "Good night, Daniel." No one saw the tears that fell as I walked away. Back home, I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing the scarf. I replayed the evening in my mind, every smile, every silence, every word he'd said. He thanked me. It wasn't much, but for me, it was everything. I knew deep down that nothing would truly change. He had his life, his family, his world, and I had my memories. But that night, for the first time in years, I felt a small piece of peace settle in my heart. I wrote in my journal before bed, something I hadn't done in years. Today I saw my son smile again. Maybe that's enough. Then I turned off the light, the scarf still around my neck, and whispered to the darkness, "Good night, my love." The silence didn't hurt as much that night. It felt gentle, almost forgiving. I didn't sleep much the week after Daniel's dinner. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his face lit by the candle glow, his voice breaking just a little when he thanked me. It had been such a small moment, but it echoed louder than anything in years. For days, I replayed it over and over, as if saying those words had stitched up all the old wounds. But healing, I've learned, isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just quieter pain. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. "Mom." My heart leapt. "Daniel." "Yeah," he said. "Listen, we're having another little get-together next weekend. Claire's planning something special actually for you. You'll come, right?" "For me?" I repeated, almost in disbelief. "Yeah, just come, it'll be nice. Bring that scarf I got you. Claire loves how it looks on you." I swallowed hard. Of course, sweetheart, I wouldn't miss it. When I hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time. A strange mix of excitement and fear stirred in my chest. It had been so long since anyone planned anything for me. That weekend, the sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that makes the whole world look like it's holding its breath. I ironed my best dress, light beige, soft and plain, with tiny floral embroidery. I wrapped the scarf around my neck carefully, smoothing out every crease. Before leaving, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The lines on my face looked deeper now, but my eyes still carried a spark, small, fragile, but alive. "Don't cry today," I told myself. "Not today." When I arrived at Daniel's house, the sound of laughter spilled out before I even knocked. The smell of roasted chicken and warm bread filled the air. For a moment, I stood frozen on the doorstep, afraid of ruining the picture of happiness inside. Claire opened the door, her smile bright. "Mrs. Bennet, you made it." "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't have missed it." Daniel came over, his arms open. "Mom." He hugged me tightly this time, so tight that for a second, I forgot how cold our relationship had grown. "You look beautiful," he said, stepping back to look at me. "That scarf suits you." I laughed softly. "You always did have good taste." He smiled. "Come in, Mom, everyone's here." The living room looked warm and alive, flowers on the table, soft music playing, candles flickering even though it was daytime. Friends, family, and neighbors filled the space. But this time, instead of feeling invisible, I felt included. People spoke to me, asked about me. Even Claire's parents, who'd always seemed distant, chatted kindly. After dinner, Daniel clinked his glass with a spoon. "All right, everyone," he said, grinning. "Before dessert, we've got something special." My heart raced. He turned to me. "Mom, come sit here." I sat, confused but smiling. He nodded to Claire, who disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later, she returned carrying a cake. But it wasn't just any cake. It was my cake, the same one I'd baked for Daniel every birthday since he was 5. Vanilla sponge, whipped cream, fresh strawberries on top. For a moment, the world around me blurred. The laughter faded, the clinking glasses dimmed, and I was back in our old kitchen, the tiny one with peeling wallpaper and a broken stove. Daniel, little again, stood on a chair beside me, his hands covered in flour. "Can I taste it now, Mommy?" "Not yet, sweetheart," I said, laughing. "You'll ruin it." "But it's my birthday." "I know," I whispered now, my voice trembling. Daniel set the cake down in front of me. "You made this for me every year," he said quietly. I thought maybe it was time I returned the favor. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I looked around, the whole room was watching, smiling, but all I saw was him, my son. "I remember," I whispered. "You used to help me decorate it." He chuckled. "Mostly I just stole the strawberries." We both laughed softly, but underneath the laughter I felt something shifting, something heavy melting away. He took a deep breath. "Mom, I know I haven't been around much, and I know I've said things I shouldn't have, but I never forgot everything you did for me." The room fell silent. "I used to think you were just old-fashioned, embarrassing, even," his voice cracked. "But I see now you were everything. You worked yourself to the bone so I could have a life you never did. He stopped, swallowing hard. Claire reached for his hand. "Go on," she whispered. He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom, for every time I made you feel small, for every call I didn't make, for every birthday I missed. I was too proud to admit that I was ashamed, not of you, but of myself. Because no matter how much I achieved, I could never be as strong as you." The words hit me like a wave. For years I had dreamed of hearing them, but never believed I would. I tried to speak, but my throat refused to move. My tears fell silently, soaking into the scarf. He stepped closer, kneeling beside me like a boy again. "Do you remember this scarf?" I nodded, touching it gently. "I bought it because it reminded me of the one you used to wrap around me when I was little. That old blue one, you said it would keep me warm on my first day of school. I told you it looked silly." I laughed through tears. "You refused to wear it, said it made you look like a snowman." He smiled. "Yeah, but you made me wear it anyway. And that morning when it started snowing, I realized you were right. You always were." The room was still. No one spoke, no one moved. Just the quiet hum of the moment, heavy and holy. He reached for my hands. "I wanted to give this to you to say, thank you, for everything, for staying when everyone else left, for loving me even when I didn't deserve it." I cupped his cheek, feeling the faint stubble under my trembling fingers. "Oh, Daniel, you were never undeserving. You were just lost, but you found your way home." He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against my hand. "I'm sorry it took me so long." "It doesn't matter," I whispered. "You're here now." I felt the warmth of his tears against my palm. Someone sniffled nearby, another person dabbed at their eyes, but I barely noticed. The rest of the world had faded away. Daniel stood and hugged me, really hugged me, tight, desperate, as though trying to make up for all the years between us. I buried my face in his shoulder and sobbed quietly, my fingers clutching the back of his shirt. When he finally let go, Claire handed me a knife. "You should do the honors," she said softly. My hands shook as I cut the cake. The scent of strawberries filled the air, sweet and familiar. Daniel laughed through his tears. "Careful, Mom. You always said the first slice is bad luck if you don't make a wish." I smiled. "Then I guess I'll make a big one." He leaned closer. "What did you wish for?" I looked at him, memorizing his face, the creases near his eyes, the softness that had returned. "I wished for time," I said. "A little more of it." He frowned slightly. "You've got plenty of time, Mom." I smiled, but I didn't answer. Because deep down, I knew the truth. I'd been feeling weaker lately. The dizziness had become more frequent. The doctor had said my heart wasn't what it used to be. I hadn't told anyone, not even Ruth. I didn't want pity. That night, surrounded by laughter and love, I realized that wishes don't need to last forever. Sometimes a single evening of peace is worth a lifetime of waiting. After everyone left, Daniel insisted on driving me home. The city lights reflected off the car windows, painting his face in soft gold. "I meant what I said tonight," he told me quietly. Things are going to be different now. I want you around more. The baby's starting to talk. You should be part of that. My eyes filled again. I'd like that. He smiled. No, Mom, I need that. When he dropped me off, he walked me to the door. The air was cool, the night still. Get some rest, okay? He said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I will. He hugged me again before leaving. As the car disappeared down the street, I stood there for a long time, the scarf fluttering gently in the breeze. Inside, I placed the cake's last slice in the fridge, then sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city hummed softly outside, but inside my heart there was finally quiet. I took the scarf from around my neck and held it close. It still carried his scent from the hug. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Maybe forgiveness isn't a grand gesture. Maybe it's just sitting in the dark with a full heart, knowing that even broken love can still be love. I looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Thank you." Then I smiled to myself, "Happy birthday, my boy." The night after the dinner, sleep came easily for the first time in years. I dreamed of nothing dramatic, just Daniel laughing as a boy, frosting on his cheek, sunlight pouring through the kitchen window. I woke smiling, the kind of smile that hurts because it's so full. The house was cold that morning. Winter had crept back while I slept. I wrapped the scarf around my shoulders and stood by the window watching the street stir awake. Somewhere, a child was calling for his mother, his voice bright and impatient. For a moment, I almost answered. My hands shook as I made tea. The simple motion of pouring water had become harder lately. My heart fluttered strangely, like a bird trapped in a cage. The doctor had warned me about episodes. I hadn't told Daniel. I didn't want his pity, only his presence, and I finally had that again. I sat at the table and opened my journal. The page from last night was still damp with tears. Under it, I began a new entry. He remembered the cake. He remembered me. If tomorrow never comes, tonight was enough. The pen slipped from my fingers halfway through the sentence. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Old woman," I muttered, "you're falling apart." Over the next few days, Daniel kept his promise. He called twice, short calls, busy tone, but still they were calls. "Just checking on you, Mom," he'd say, and that was enough to make my entire day glow. He told me he wanted me to come for Sunday lunch soon, to spend time with the baby. I promised I would. I even began knitting a tiny blue sweater, though my hands weren't what they used to be. Every stitch was a prayer whispered between breaths. Sometimes, while I worked, I'd catch myself humming the lullaby I used to sing to him. The melody trembled, weak and off-key, but it filled the empty room with ghosts that didn't hurt anymore. That Friday, the weather turned harsh again, gray skies, wind howling like grief through the cracks. I felt tired all day, but I told myself it was nothing. I heated soup, watched an old movie, wrapped the scarf tighter around me. Late that evening, I took out a piece of stationery. The kind Daniel had bought me years ago, still smelling faintly of lavender, and began writing. Not because I planned to send it, but because there were words I needed to let out before they dissolved inside me. My dearest Daniel, if you ever read this, it means I didn't get the chance to say it again. Thank you for that night, for the cake, for the scarf, for remembering. You made an old woman feel seen. That was all I ever wanted. You once told me to cover my old face. You were joking, I know. But if you could see what I see now, you'd know these wrinkles are just lines drawn by love, proof that I lived every day for you. If I could live again, I'd still choose the same life. I'd still choose you. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the box with his childhood drawings. Then I sat back, exhausted but strangely peaceful. Outside, the wind had calmed. The city was asleep. I whispered into the quiet, "Good night, my boy." The next morning, I didn't wake up. That's what Ruth told Daniel later. The neighbor had found me sitting by the window, scarf still around my shoulders, a half-finished sweater in my lap. The tea beside me was cold, untouched. When Daniel arrived, the paramedics had already gone. The room smelled of lavender and rain. He stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty chair. Ruth handed him the letter. "She wrote this," she said softly. "It was in her box." He opened it slowly. His hands trembled before he even reached the second line. By the end, his knees gave out and he sank to the floor, the paper crushed against his chest. He stayed there for hours. Later, he went through the box, every drawing, every note, every memory he'd forgotten. There was the crayon picture of the two stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun, me and Mommy forever. He traced the letters with his thumb, tears dripping onto the paper. He found the old scarf too, the faded blue one I used to wrap around him. He lifted it to his face and breathed in the faint scent of detergent and time. Ruth watched from the doorway, her eyes wet. "She never stopped loving you," she whispered. "I know," he said hoarsely. "That's the problem, I didn't deserve it." The funeral was small, just a few neighbors, Ruth and Daniel's family. I was buried beside my mother in the quiet cemetery near the lake. The wind carried the scent of lilies and damp earth. Daniel stood at the grave, holding the scarf I'd worn that night. Claire stood beside him, the baby in her arms. When the priest finished, Daniel stepped forward. His voice shook. My mother, she wasn't a woman of many words, but everything she ever did spoke louder than words. He paused, breathing unevenly. She gave up everything for me, her dreams, her comfort, even her pride. And he stopped, pressing a hand to his mouth. I wasted so many years trying to become someone she could be proud of, when all she ever wanted was for me to remember her. A sob escaped his throat. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "For every call I didn't make, for every time I looked away, I hope you can hear me now." He placed the scarf on the grave, the silk fluttering gently in the wind. Then he took the baby's tiny hand and guided it toward the stone. "This is your grandmother," he said softly, "the bravest woman I'll ever know." The baby gurgled, reaching for the scarf, and for a moment Daniel smiled through the tears. Weeks passed. Life, cruel as it is, moved forward, but something in Daniel changed. He started visiting my grave every Sunday. He'd bring fresh flowers, lilies, because I once told him they smelled like heaven. He'd sit on the grass, talking quietly as if I were still there. Sometimes he brought his son. They'd sit together, the little boy playing with pebbles while Daniel told him stories about a woman who worked 3 jobs, who baked cakes from nothing, who never stopped smiling even when life broke her heart. "She used to sing to me," he'd tell him. "Her voice wasn't perfect, but it could calm any storm." The boy would look up and ask, "Do you miss her?" Daniel would nod, every single day. One evening, months later, Daniel and Claire hosted a small gathering for the baby's first birthday. Family and friends filled the house again. The laughter was genuine this time, softer, lighter. When the cake came out, white frosting, strawberries on top, Daniel smiled faintly, just like Mom used to make. He lifted his son into his arms and helped him blow out the candle. Then he cut a small slice and placed it on a separate plate. Claire looked at him curiously. "What's that for?" "For Mom," he said quietly. He placed the plate by the window, where the moonlight touched it. No one spoke. But in that silence, everyone felt something gentle pass through the room, like warmth, like memory. Daniel looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Happy birthday, Mom." Years went by. The little boy grew taller, curious, full of the same stubborn spark I once saw in his father. Every Sunday, they visited the cemetery together. "Tell me about her again," the boy would ask. Daniel would smile. "She was kind, stronger than she ever admitted. She loved me more than I deserved." "And the scarf?" "She gave it to me when I was small. I gave it back when she was old. It's how we said sorry without words." The boy would nod solemnly, though he didn't fully understand. But one day he would. I like to imagine them now, my son and my grandson, standing by the lake, the sun setting behind them. Maybe the boy throws pebbles into the water and laughs the way Daniel once did. Maybe Daniel smiles and hears my voice in the breeze. Maybe, just maybe, he finally knows that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering with tenderness instead of pain. If I could speak to him now, I'd tell him this. Love is not measured by time spent together, but by the moments that survive after one of you is gone. You can't repay a mother's love. You can only live in a way that honors it. And if he could hear me, I think he'd whisper back, "I understand now, Mom." Sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees near my grave, the blue scarf flutters against the headstone. Passers-by say it looks like someone gently touching the stone, brushing away the dust. Maybe it's just the wind. Or maybe it's me, still trying to keep my son warm. Because a mother's love doesn't end. It lingers, in scarves, in cakes, in the soft memory of hands that once held too much and never let go soon enough. And even in silence, it speaks.